Always so great, such an honor to be here and partake in this very magical and sacred opportunity that humans have to share and connect. I really always appreciate this. And some of you have probably heard this phrase, stream of consciousness. Usually when we hear it or we say it, it's because we're describing someone who is communicating in a sort of unfiltered, unending way that seems to represent what we experience in our brains most of the time. You know, those images and sounds that just never seem to stop. And normally when we're communicating, right, like ideally I'm up here filtering that stream and trying to put it in some sort of useful, clear package to you that you can understand. But stream of consciousness is when we just kind of let it out, you know. And I used to partake in a sport called whitewater kayaking. I used to do this quite a bit. And the more time I have spent meditating, the more I have realized that, and if, just in case you need evidence, that's me. The more time I've spent meditating, the more I have realized that things I learned from navigating real rivers are actually very useful metaphors for how to navigate this stream of consciousness, this like unending flow. And it's not an accident that we refer to it as a stream of consciousness. So I want to share some of these perhaps tidbits, some possibilities for navigating the stream of consciousness with you today. And the first challenge, the really big challenge I think that all meditators and all kayakers encounter right off the bat is, what is it? What are we actually trying to do on this river here? What is this whitewater all about? We might call it turbulence. And in terms of meditation, this challenge is often expressed commonly in two ways, and they're just variations on the same thing. And the first way is that I have said this, I'm sure many of you have said it, I hear it all the time. You know, I don't think I'm a good meditator. I just can't stop my thoughts. I just can't get them to calm down and stop. The second variation on this is, you know, I just don't understand. I've been doing all this meditation. I just meditated for like a half hour, and I still feel angry, lonely, sad, annoyed. Insert your favorite icky feeling there, right? Whatever it is. And that's really just a variation on the same thing. Like, I'm meditating, but I'm still feeling these things. I don't know why I can't get these emotions to stop. Interestingly, I have never gotten off a river. I've never heard anyone else get off a river and say, you know, I just don't understand. I think I'm a really bad kayaker because I just couldn't get the river to stop. And it sounds so silly to say that out loud, but yet that's really what we're saying when we say that about our mind, right? And the other thing I've never said when I've got off the river is, you know, I just don't understand. I went out to this river and I spent 3 hours on it every day this week and it's still there. I don't understand why it just hasn't gone away yet. And that's the same thing that we say about our emotions. You know, I'm doing all this meditating. I don't know why I'm still feeling all these emotions. Again, it sounds absurd, and yet that is oftentimes the expectation that we bring to what meditation is about. But if we look at the river analogy, it's really clear to see it's not about making the river stop or dry up and disappear. Because if you think about it, what do we call a river that's not flowing? We don't call it a river, we call it a pond or a lake, something that's not a river. And consciousness is like that. It is alive, it is dynamic. It is not something to be to be stamped out, dried up, or stopped. So the idea is that our meditation practice is all about learning to navigate and to go with the flow so that we can get down the stream of consciousness in an effective way, and ideally maybe have some fun along the way too. So once we've figured out what navigating the stream of consciousness is really all about, right? That it's not about fighting the white water, it's about getting through it. Then there's another challenge that often comes up, and this is the challenge of finding balance. And you often hear me when I guide meditations talk about this balance of alertness and ease, right? Energy and calm. And it's the same thing on a river. If you've ever been on a river, then you'll kind of understand this, but there's a phrase that we have called the main stream, right? And that comes from the idea of in the middle of the river, that's where the main current is, the main part of the stream. And ideally, when you get on the river, there is something called an eddy. It's like a calm spot, usually like a rock or some trees have created, or some vegetation have created a little calm spot. And there's a little boundary there that you need to cross to get into the main stream. And because the river, the water is moving at a different rate, there's actually a little force required. So if you don't put in enough effort, if you don't paddle hard enough, you'll just kind of bounce off the mainstream. You won't actually get out into the current. But there's this thing that happens in kayaking where, as a beginner, I've definitely done it, and a lot of new kayakers do it, where you kind of overcompensate. And then you tend to hit at a weird angle, or your paddle catches on something and you get flipped upside down. So it's all about finding that balance. And the same way as you go down the river, right? If you're just paddling as hard as you can the whole time and really fighting against the current, then you'll run out of energy to actually navigate with the river. You won't have enough energy to navigate it safely or well. But at the same time, if you don't put in any effort at all, you're likely to get carried off into dangerous places or just kind of stuck in an obstacle somewhere. So it's all about that balance. You need to put in enough effort to navigate, but not so much effort that you're wearing yourself out. And we can look at meditation practice the same way, both in just the moment-by-moment practice and in our larger practice over the days and months and years. So moment by moment, this is really embodied in a term called shamatha, which is a specific type of meditation. It's often translated as concentration meditation, but that word doesn't really get at the full picture, because when we think of concentration in English, it tends to have that very efforting sense to it, right? That laser focus, really just bearing down on one thing. But shamatha is usually more accurately translated as calm abiding, right? The idea abide means to stay in one place, and calm is to do it with a certain level of ease, right? And so that's the idea, is we can stay on the river with a sense of ease that allows us to be flexible and respond, because the river is always changing, moment by moment. And so when we meditate, we notice that we're always needing to fine-tune. Sometimes we need more energy, a little more effort. We need to paddle a little bit harder to stay in the main current. But sometimes we need to just ease up a little bit and let the river do some of the work, right? And it's a dynamic thing, you know? The river's always changing, our consciousness is always changing, we are always changing. And in the grand scheme of things, from day to day, from week to week, month to month, we might need to adjust our practice, right? In a sense, you know, am I approaching sitting down to meditate as this sort of forced march, or am I approaching it as this interesting adventure and bringing a sense of playfulness to it, right? So it's about that balance. that balance. And we always say in the opening prayer of refuge, we talk about calling upon enthusiastic effort, right? Enthusiastic effort, not harsh, gritting the teeth effort. Enthusiastic effort. There's that softness, and that balance is key for optimal navigation. And then the third challenge I want to talk about is that of realistic expectations, right? Really understanding what's to be expected, what can realistically be expected as an outcome. So in whitewater, rivers are classified by how turbulent they are. So a class 1 river, you can think of, floating down the stream in an inner tube with your favorite beverage in hand. Kind of, some of you, if you're from the Midwest, maybe you've done that classic Midwestern float trip where there's really not a lot of effort. That would be a level 1, right? Level 6 is, do not get on this river, please. There is no boat that is designed to safely take you through this level of whitewater. So if you think about, if I have only ever gone on a class 1 or 2 or 3 river, it is unrealistic for me to expect to get on a level 4 or 5 and have the same type of experience. It's also unrealistic if I am thrown into a section of a river that might be considered class 6 or 5 and to expect to not have any difficulty at all, right? That's just beyond what, a level 6 is beyond what any person could reasonably expected to navigate without difficulty. And yet, sometimes I find myself doing this, and sometimes I hear other people doing this with meditation. It's like, I've spent all this time meditating, and when I'm on my cushion, when I'm in Temple Buddhist Center Sunday service, I feel so calm and great. But when my boss yells at me in front of 10 other people, I still get upset, and I don't understand why. Well, that's a level 5 whitewater situation there, right? That's really intense. And so it's important to be realistic about where our skill level is. And even the most skilled kayaker needs to realize that sometimes things are just difficult, no matter what your skill level is. Another aspect of this realistic expectation is also to understand what role meditation actually serves, what it really shines at. And so the analogy I would give here is that any kind of exercise supports our overall fitness, right? I can go out and do any kind of exercise and I'm going to improve my lung capacity, my general strength and fitness. But kayaking a whole bunch is unlikely to make me a really good golfer, right? The skill doesn't directly transfer. It will help my fitness, which may help my golf game a little bit, but it's not necessarily direct. And I'm sure some of you have been watching the Olympics and following along. And one thing, if you look at high-level athletes, one thing that you may know that they do is they cross-train, right? They don't just kayak. They don't just play tennis. They don't just do XYZ sport. They also lift weights. They also do flexibility training. Sometimes they work with sports psychologists. Sometimes they do visualization, right? They're doing a whole lot of other things. And it's important to realize that a similar paradigm exists in our meditation practice. Meditation is really good at building our attentional skills, the certain mental capacities. But that doesn't mean that meditating a whole lot is going to make you better at managing your finances automatically. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help you navigate really specific, difficult psychological material. It doesn't mean it's gonna necessarily make you better at your social skills. So sometimes we need to cross-train. We need to enlist help in those areas. And in my own personal meditation experience, this is something I've heard echoed by others, but for me, it's been really powerful to acknowledge this need for this quote-unquote cross-training. And it's been a cycle that's repeated many times where, meditation allows me to see some parts of my experience or of my being that I wasn't able to see before. And maybe that's been some psychological stuff that's come up, and it's been difficult. And at those times, I've actually had experiences where that psychological stuff started coming up, and it began to be really difficult to meditate. And so I enlisted the help of a therapist and started doing that cross-training. And once I was able to resolve that material, and the meditation helped support that, right? It wasn't like one either or, it was yes and. They combined together. But once I was able to kind of work through that psychological stuff, then my meditation practice, there was that renewed sense of ease and openness, and new levels opened there. And this is something that's gone back and forth. And I recently found this process happening again. Sort of things have been unveiled, and so I've gone back into therapy. And it's a wonderful dynamic process. So it's important to remember, if we look at the Noble Eightfold Path that the Buddha laid out, meditation is one of the steps, but only one of the parts of that path. So it's important not to see meditation as the panacea, right? The only thing that we need to do. We have other sources of support and options. So cross-training so that we can navigate all areas of our life skillfully is really important. And then I just want to throw in a little bonus tip. It's not a particular challenge, just a pro tip, and that is safety in numbers. And in kayaking, we generally say that ideally you should have at least a buddy, one other person. More eyes on the river allows you to see hazards kind of before they come up, maybe catch any potential difficult areas. And if something happens, you're there to help each other. The more difficult the river is, the more technical it is, then the more buddies you want. 3 is kind of considered the minimum for more challenging rivers, because then, again, more eyes to see what's coming. But if something does go a little wrong or a lot wrong, you have somebody who can stay on the river, get that person off the river, and somebody who can go for help. And I would say there's also safety in Sangha, right? Sangha is the word for spiritual community. It's one of the 3 jewels, and I'm always talking about it because it is so important. And it can look a lot of different ways. It can look just like a spiritual friend, just somebody who happens to also be interested in spiritual growth, in meditation. You have a shared language, somebody you can talk to about your experience as a meditator or your experiences of spiritual growth. It could look like working with a teacher or teachers. It could look like being in a practice group. It can look like all 3 of those things. But whatever way it looks, the idea is that having these buddies, having these connections, having this team will help you see stuff before you get into it, so that you can maybe avoid the difficulties in the first place. But if you do get into difficult times, you have a support structure. You have a team that can help get you down the river safely. And ideally, you want to build that team before you get on the river, right? Before you hit the turbulence, before you hit the whitewater. And so, just want to conclude with saying that, having these tips, knowing potentially how to navigate turbulence before you get on the river can make the difference of having a really good day or really bad day, whether it's on a river or in the stream of consciousness. So when we understand that we're trying to navigate the stream rather than fight with it, when we understand that we need to balance our effort and ease, find that calm and that strength as we navigate it. And we need to cross-train. We need to get support in other areas to maximize that safe and joyful navigation. When we bring all of those together, it's likely to be a very rewarding and very amazing journey. And so wherever you are on your stream of consciousness today and all the days to come, may every river lead us all towards true freedom.